welcome to the third video on my channel, and today we're going to be looking at a scenario where Indonesia formed an empire. Real quick, this video is heavily inspired by AdizzPro and is only the third video on my channel, so it would mean a lot if you liked and subscribed. Anyway, let's get into the video. Now, Indonesia is a much bigger country than you might think. Also, it spans all of the continental US from east to west. Indonesia is also the fourth most populated country in the world, only behind China, India, and the USA. Most of its population is on this island of Java. Believe it or not, but this island's population is more than the entirety of Russia's. Its capital, Jakarta, is also located on Java. It has many neighbours. Some are weak, like East Timor and Brunei, but some are strong, like the Philippines and Australia. Its first target is East Timor. Indonesia quickly takes the exclave, and after taking the capital, East Timor or Timor-Leste is quickly capitulated. The country is fully annexed. Then goes after Singapore, which doesn't take long, and the country is also fully annexed. Now it's time for Indonesia to go after a slightly stronger neighbour. This, of course, being Papua New Guinea. Indonesia pushes in, takes a lot of land in the north. They push south, capturing many of the indigenous tribes in Papua New Guinea. They push back in the north, but Indonesia slithers along the coast. It splits Papua New Guinea into two, and eventually the north is taken. They go south down this peninsula, and eventually take the capital. In order to not get invaded, Bougainville gains independence 5 years early. Eventually, the main part of the island is taken, and what is left of the Papua New Guinea government surrenders. The country is fully annexed, and Bougainville is granted independence. Speaking of Bougainville, yeah, they don't last long. Their next target is Malaysia. They cut Malaysian Borneo into two, and capture the western half. Indonesia makes a landing near Kuala Lumpur and meets with Brunei. Sabah is taken, and eventually Malaysian Borneo is capitulated. They push in from Singapore and push north. The country's two fronts meet, encircling Kuala Lumpur. After a few weeks, it is taken, and the country surrenders. By the way, I am buffing Indonesia for this video. I would likely not be able to pull this off so easily in real life. Indonesia annexes the Malaysian land on Borneo, but Malaysia keeps its land in mainland Asia. They then invade their small new neighbour Brunei, and the war ends quite quickly. The country is fully annexed. Across the Bay of Bengal, Sri Lanka is its next target. They make a landing on the island, and another in the west. Indonesia goes along the eastern coast, and the country is split in two. Sri Lanka pushes them back in the south, but Colombo is taken. Indonesia captures the northern half of the country, and Sri Lanka surrenders. The country is fully annexed. They then invade these oceanic islands. I do know some of the countries that it's invading, but I'm not sure which one's which. I would imagine some of these are actually French and British, but the only one I know is New Caledonia, so I just didn't colour that one in. It says it's just invading all the ones over here that are its own country. It takes Palau, and soon after they're all capitulated. All of them are fully annexed. Indonesia's empire now stretches from Sri Lanka to many oceanic islands in the Far East, but their next target is their strongest yet. I'm of course talking about the Philippines. They make a landing on Mindanao, taking Davao and eventually the entire island. They capture this westernmost one, and island hop north. The Philippines retakes some of its islands, but Indonesia captures this island here. The capital of the Philippines, Manila, is around here, and that is Indonesia's main goal. They cut this island in two and take the peninsula. The Philippines retakes these two islands, but Indonesia captures some in the south. They continue sailing north, but the two countries then decide to sue for peace. In the peace treaty, Indonesia takes the southernmost islands, but the Philippines lives on. Indonesia's next target, which may or may not be its strongest yet, is Australia. But this causes some allies to join in, like New Zealand and the UK. They make a landing in the country and take Darwin. They take this island and make a landing on this peninsula. Whilst Australia is a very advanced country, since most of it is desert, it doesn't have a very high population. Indonesia has hundreds of millions of people, but at this point is the third most populous country in the world, ahead of the US. And while Australia does have superior gear, the small army is no match for the huge Indonesian one. They push along the coast, but don't really bother with the desert. Indonesia makes a lot of progress, but then British troops arrive. Now, the UK has great military gear, but also a huge army, which is much stronger than Australia's. So after the Brits arrive, Indonesia is pushed back. They also make a landing in New Zealand, splitting this island in two and capturing the south. Indonesia pushes along the eastern coast and makes an encirclement. Any troops are captured. British troops kick Indonesia out of New Zealand. But Indonesia makes a landing in the east. It goes along the coast, meeting up with the other front, forming one large front into the northeast of Australia. However, it is soon after cut into two fronts, and the eastern part is taken. Make another landing in New Zealand, this time in North Island, and goes on to take the entire island. Indonesia makes more progress, and does surprisingly well, managing to capitulate New Zealand, make landing on the other side of Sydney, and eventually encircle the city. Eventually, Sydney is taken. They push south, capturing the capital. They take Tasmania, they make a landing in the west, which takes Perth, after retaking Darwin and reconnecting its two fronts. Australia decides to sue for peace after losing all of its most valuable cities. Indonesia is technically still at war with the UK, but now that Australia is out, the UK sees no point in fighting this war, so they sign peace with the Indonesians. Indonesia takes a lot of land in northern Australia and fully annexes New Zealand. Guide of more Indonesian expansion, Malaysia, Thailand, Cambodia, Australia, and the Philippines form a new alliance. This new alliance is called the Anti-Indonesian Expansion League, and is like NATO. So if Indonesia attacks one country, the best will all come to its aid. Indonesia doesn't really have anywhere else to expand, but Indonesia is now very powerful, and so it thinks it can take this league on. It activates it by invading Malaysia. This of course activates the alliance. Of course, Indonesia had already planned for this, so it had troops all across the border with Australia. Said troops push into the country from all along its border. This time the UK doesn't come to Australia's aid, as by defending Malaysia it technically brought itself into the war. It invades southern Malaysia, and after encircling the city, takes Kuala Lumpur. However, the Philippines is able to push south, capturing some of its old islands. Indonesia eventually capitulates Malaysia and pushes into the Thai Peninsula. Indonesia once again pushes along the Australian coast. Australia hasn't quite recovered from its recent war with Indonesia, and therefore isn't able to defend well. It does, however, make a landing on New Zealand and takes the North Island. Thailand pushes south, and Indonesia retakes some of its Filipino islands. Australia pushes back the Indonesians, and it retrieves its last Filipino island. Thailand and Indonesia push back and forth many times, but eventually Indonesia comes out on top. Indonesia continues to push down the Aussie coast and starts to invade the Philippines. They push north and approach Manila. Eventually, the city is surrounded, but the Filipino troops in the north start to push back. Indonesia pushes some more into Thailand and approaches Bangkok. It also makes a landing in Cambodia, which cuts the country off from its coast. Some Filipinos in the south revolt, and 3 rebellions appear throughout the country. Indonesia pushes more into the Australian outback and makes a large encirclement. New Zealand is fully retaken, and Tasmania is captured. Indonesia also continues to push down the Aussie coast. Cambodia manages to push back Indonesia, and eventually fully push it out of its country, with help from Thailand, whilst Indonesia slowly approaches the capital of Thailand, which is Bangkok. They also push north up Thailand, and make another landing in the country. Indonesia then makes a spearhead campaign northeast. Indonesia deals with all 3 Filipino rebellions, and they continued to approach Manila. They push north, and push in from the south. After a few weeks, the entirety of the north is captured, and Manila is all that's left of the country. In a few months, Indonesia manages to take Sydney, and expands its very broad front. They make a landing in the west, which goes on to take Perth, and Indonesia continues to push south. It takes cities like Melbourne and Adelaide. At this point, many Australians have evacuated to the west, to places such as the US, UK, and Canada. In Thailand, eventually, Bangkok is encircled, and Indonesia pushes in. Indonesia starts another spearhead campaign in the north, which tries to split Thailand into 2. They push along the coast into Cambodia, but eventually, Bangkok is taken. Thailand is split in 2. In a few weeks, the northern half is taken. What is left of Thailand surrenders, and they push into Cambodia. Soon after, Manila is taken, capitulating the Philippines, and the blue team's team of 5 has now been reduced to only 2. Indonesia continues to push along the Australian coast, and after pretty much all of its major cities are taken, Australia surrenders. Probably the weakest out of the 5 countries, Cambodia is the last one remaining. Indonesia pushes along the coast, and before Indonesia manages to capture any of Cambodia's cities, realizing that Cambodia would definitely not win it, the country surrenders. Indonesia just won a 5v1 war, and in the peace treaty goes all out. It fully annexes all 5 countries that it just beat in the war. Now this was likely a bad idea for Indonesia, because the country is now very unstable. It took over all these countries in probably about 2 decades, and none of the countries it invaded want to be in Indonesia. This means that this new empire will likely collapse within the next few decades. But this is the extent that Indonesia decides to go for expansion. It well over doubled in size, probably even tripled, maybe even quadrupled. It invaded and fully annexed about 15 countries, give or take a few. It probably only went from the 4th to the 3rd most populous country in the world, just because there's a very big gap between 3rd place, the USA, and India in 2nd place, by about 1 billion people. This new empire probably has about 500 million to 600 million, I'd say, but that's probably way off. Anyway, let's take a look at these new Indonesian states. And here they are. Sri Lanka, being so far off from the rest of the nation, gets its own state. There's this one, which includes Thailand, Malaysia, and Cambodia, and it's all of the country that is in mainland Asia. There's the main Indonesian one, which includes Java, Sumatra, and a few surrounding islands. There's one called Borneo, which is unsurprisingly the island of Borneo. There's one for the Philippines. There's another Indonesian one with many of the easternmost islands. There's one called New Guinea, which contains the island of New Guinea as well as some other islands over here. And there's 2 Australian ones, one in the west and one in the east, the easternmost one containing New Zealand as well. And that concludes this video. Again, this video is heavily inspired by AdizzPro, so go check him out if you haven't already. And since it's only the 3rd video on my channel, it would mean a lot if you liked or subscribed. Please give me any advice or video ideas in the comments. And that's all. Goodbye!